At 2 in the morning, my 56-year-old brother called me from a parking lot and said something I never thought I'd hear from a grown man. Cole, I'm afraid to go home. Dean had been married to Sheila for 30 years. That night, I finally understood what those 30 years had done to him. My name is Cole Bryant. I'm 58, a retired corrections officer from Louisville, Kentucky, and I spent most of my adult life watching men behind locked doors. I knew the look of someone who had stopped expecting the door to open. But the most trapped man I ever knew wasn't inside a prison. He was my own brother. I'd first noticed it about 3 years into Dean's marriage, but I never understood how deep it went until that phone call. Patrice was asleep beside me when my phone buzzed. I saw Dean's name and sat up immediately. For several seconds, all I heard was his breathing. Then came that one word, Cole. His voice took me straight back to when we were 9 and he'd fallen off the garage roof, too shaken to know whether he was hurt. "Where are you?" I asked. "Covington parking lot. Hyde Park." "Dean, it's 2 in the morning. I know. I just couldn't go home." He tried to explain, stopped, then finally told me what had happened. He'd asked Sheila if he could go fishing with Butcher's cousin the following weekend. One weekend. Dean hadn't been fishing in 4 years. Sheila said no because she wanted the garage reorganized before the Pattersons visited. The Pattersons weren't coming until October. Dean pointed out that he could go fishing, clean the garage afterward, and still have 3 weeks to spare. Sheila didn't yell. She didn't argue. She simply looked at him and said, "I thought you cared about this family," then walked away. Dean went silent on the phone. "I've been sitting here for an hour, Cole. I don't know how to walk back into that house." That was when I realized this wasn't about fishing. Patrice's hand found my arm in her sleep. I covered it with mine and told Dean, "Stay on the phone. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." He talked for 91 minutes, and with every story, the marriage I thought I understood became something else entirely. 12 years earlier, Dean had been offered a promotion at his engineering firm that would have moved them to Portland. He wanted it badly and was ready to accept. Sheila never gave him the chance. She called his supervisor herself and declined the promotion on Dean's behalf, telling the man the timing wasn't right for their family. Dean found out 2 weeks later from his own supervisor. When he confronted Sheila, she gave him 4 words. "I was protecting us." Then came the money. Their savings account was in Sheila's name only. Even though Dean's paycheck went directly into it, she controlled what came out. Dean got money for gas and lunch, and when he described it to me, he used a word that made my jaw tighten: allowance. A grown man with a career was asking permission to spend his own paycheck. I wanted to interrupt, but I didn't. I needed to hear how far this went. Then Dean brought up Marcus Ford, his closest friend since college and the man who had stood beside him as best man at his wedding. About 8 years earlier, Sheila decided Marcus was irresponsible and a bad influence because he had gone through a divorce. According to her, that kind of thinking could spread. Invitations became arguments. Phone calls became accusations. Eventually, Dean stopped seeing Marcus because avoiding him was easier than dealing with Sheila afterward. By the night he called me, they hadn't spoken in nearly 7 years. A promotion gone, his money controlled, his best friend erased from his life. And Dean had accepted each loss one at a time because no single one had seemed big enough to destroy a marriage over. But 30 years of small losses had left my brother sitting alone in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, afraid to go home because he had asked to spend one weekend fishing. I thought that was the worst of it. Then Dean lowered his voice and said 2 names I hadn't expected: Tyler and Mara. And that was when the story stopped being only about what Sheila had done to my brother. Tyler and Mara were Dean's own children. Good kids, both of them, but they had grown up watching their father ask permission for things most adults never thought twice about. Tyler was 26 and still believed that was simply how marriage worked. Mara had moved to Columbus 2 years earlier, and whenever she wanted to call her father, she waited until she knew Sheila wasn't home. That detail hit me harder than I expected. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom and felt something settle inside me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was a decision. When Dean finally ran out of words, I said, "Go across the river and get a room at the Covington Inn. I know the manager. I'll call ahead." Dean hesitated. "Cole, I can't just..." You're sitting alone in a parking lot at 2 in the morning because you're afraid to go home. Whether you planned it or not, you've already left for tonight. Get the room." He was quiet. Then I told him the part I'd already decided. "I'm coming to Cincinnati." Another long silence. "You don't have to do that." "I know." I swung my legs out of bed. "I want to. Truth is, I've wanted to do something for about 25 years. I just never had the right opening." When I ended the call, Patrice was already awake. She didn't bother pretending she'd been asleep. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough." I turned on the lamp. "I'm going to Cincinnati." Patrice sat up and studied me with the same steady look she'd given me throughout 32 years of marriage. Then she said 2 words. "The switch?" I looked at her. The switch. This wasn't some plan we'd spent years preparing. It had started as one of those half-serious conversations married couples have when someone they love is trapped in a situation they can't fix. Every once in a while, after another story about Sheila, one of us would say, "What if you just went there?" And we never finished the sentence. We didn't need to anymore. "How long?" Patrice asked. "A week. Maybe 10 days. She picked up her phone without another question. "I'll call the school and reschedule your sub-coverage." Patrice taught 4th grade and handled every complicated problem in our lives with the same calm patience she used to teach fractions. Then she looked at me. "You'll need to practice Dean's handwriting. He still does that weird thing with his 7s. "Patrice, we're identical twins. Sheila knows me." "Exactly. And you haven't been in the same room with her for 4 years. If something feels wrong, she'll start looking." I opened my mouth to argue. Patrice gave me the look. "Practice the 7s, Cole." So I practiced the 7s. By Friday morning, I was in Covington. Dean was waiting in room 114 of the Covington Inn, a quiet room overlooking the river. When he opened the door, something about him had already changed. He looked exhausted, but lighter, like a man who had finally slept without listening for footsteps outside the door. We sat at the small table by the window and stared at each other. Same jaw, same eyes, same slight asymmetry on the left side of our faces. We had been born minutes apart, carrying almost identical faces, yet life had somehow turned those faces into 2 completely different men. Dean kept studying me until he finally said, "This is strange. It's always strange. We're twins." "No." He gestured between us. "You look like what I think I'm supposed to look like." That sentence settled the last doubt I had. 30 years with Sheila hadn't just controlled Dean's choices. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped recognizing the man he might have been. I leaned forward. "All right. Here's what happens next." Dean's expression changed. "You're going to tell me everything about your life with Sheila. Her schedule, your schedule, what she cooks, what you eat, what you watch at night, what you drive to work, which route you take, when you leave, when you come home, where you keep your keys, what she asks when you walk through the door, what makes her suspicious, what makes her angry, what she notices and what she ignores." Dean stared at me. "Cole, everything, Dean. If I'm going to walk into your house and let Sheila believe I'm you, I can't just look like my brother." I held his gaze. "For the next 10 days, I have to become him." "Cole, she's going to know." Dean looked genuinely worried. "Maybe," I said, lifting my coffee. "Eventually. But before she figures it out, I want her to experience something she hasn't felt in 30 years. Dean waited, not knowing what you're going to do next. For a moment, he said nothing. Then the corner of his mouth moved into the smallest smile I'd seen from him. "You know the garage? What about it? She reorganized it last spring. There's nothing wrong with it." I figured. He looked through the window at the Ohio River, drifting gray beneath the September sky. "She made the whole thing up." "I know, Dean." His smile disappeared. "She told my boss I didn't want that promotion. You told me." "No, Cole." He turned toward me. "I wanted that promotion." There was something different in his voice now. Not louder, just firmer. For the first time since I arrived, I wasn't looking at someone who had learned to surrender before the argument started. I was looking at my brother. "I know you did." Dean held my eyes. "Just don't blow up my house." "I'm not going to blow up your house." I set down my coffee. "I'm going to remind everyone inside it what you sound like when you stop asking permission." We spent Friday and Saturday turning me into Dean. He talked. I filled page after page of a yellow legal pad because Patrice had been right. The face would get me through the door, but the details would keep me there. Sheila's schedule, her morning coffee, Dean's work routine, his route to the office, which neighbors he talked to and which ones he avoided, where he left his wallet, where he put his shoes, even the exact way he loaded the dishwasher because Sheila had corrected him so many times that he no longer thought about it. Then came the details that told me more than Dean realized. Sheila referred to his engineering work as your little projects. He repeated the phrase without emotion. He had heard it so often that the insult had become background noise. I wrote it down anyway. Sunday morning, Dean boarded a Greyhound for Louisville. Patrice was waiting when he arrived. She had agreed to give him a room, feed him properly, and keep him away from his phone unless something truly mattered. Later, she told me exactly what she'd said when Dean walked through our door. Come inside. Eat something real. Your brother's got this. That afternoon, I climbed into Dean's sensible gray sedan and drove across the river toward Hyde Park. Sheila's favorite radio station was already programmed. I left it playing. When I pulled into Dean's driveway, I stayed behind the wheel for a few seconds and stared at the house. Sheila had spent 30 years learning how to control every predictable response my brother gave her. Now she was about to meet the same face with a completely different set of instincts. I got out, walked to the front door, and stepped inside. Sheila was in the kitchen making Sunday dinner, pot roast. Dean had called it her performance meal, the dinner she made whenever she wanted the house to look warm, normal, and perfectly managed. She glanced up as I entered. You're late. Traffic on the bridge. I hung Dean's keys exactly where he had instructed me. Right hook? Always the right hook. Then I walked toward the kitchen as if I'd made that trip 10,000 times, because Dean had. Sheila turned back to the stove. The Pattersons confirmed October 15th. I told them we'd have dinner here. I need you to look at the garage this week. The shelving on the left has been loose for months. I'll take a look. Also, your mother called. I'll call her back. She called twice. I stopped. Then I turned and looked directly at Sheila. She never looked back. She remained focused on the stove, perfectly composed, issuing instructions with the effortless confidence of someone who had spent decades expecting them to be followed. 25 years working inside correctional institutions had taught me to recognize that kind of control. People who expect obedience don't always bother making eye contact when they give an order. Eye contact leaves room for a response. Sheila wasn't expecting one. This time, she was going to get one. Instructions don't negotiate. I'll call her back, Sheila. Same calm voice. No irritation, no challenge. She gave no response, which told me the conversation was over. It seemed like nothing, a husband saying he would return his mother's call when he was ready. But by Wednesday, Sheila would remember that moment very differently. Dinner stayed quiet. Tyler stopped by from Oakley, about 12 minutes away, and joined us for pot roast. He was 26, worked at a marketing firm downtown, and spent most of dinner talking normally. But once, across the table, I caught him studying me. It wasn't suspicion. It was something more careful, almost like he had noticed a change he didn't want to name yet. I stored that look away. After Tyler left, I cleared the table and started washing the dishes without being asked. That was apparently my first mistake. Sheila appeared in the doorway and watched me like a person checking a staircase after hearing a strange crack. I kept washing. Later, I settled into the living room and turned on the evening news. At 9, Sheila entered, sat in her usual chair, and opened a book. 10 minutes passed. You're quiet tonight. Long week. I kept watching the television. Good quiet, though. A page turned. I almost smiled. Dean had warned me about those two words. Years earlier, he'd once described an evening as good quiet, and Sheila had corrected him immediately. According to her, quiet was never good. Quiet meant somebody was avoiding something, so I waited. 30 seconds later, right on schedule, her book lowered slightly. What does that mean? Good quiet means I'm comfortable. I didn't turn toward her. House feels okay. Then I added, doesn't always feel okay. Silence. A long one. Finally, Sheila retreated to safer ground. The pot roast was good. Yeah, it was. At 10:30, I climbed into Dean's bed and stared at the ceiling he had looked at for 30 years. Same room, same house, same marriage from Sheila's point of view, but the man lying beside her wasn't going to follow the old script. Monday morning, I was making coffee when Sheila came downstairs in her robe, already wearing what I'd started calling her management posture, chin raised, shoulders set, every sentence ready to become somebody else's assignment. She reached for her mug. The Hendersons are coming Saturday. I need you to confirm the menu with Sandra. She has that dairy thing now. Move your thing with Tyler to Sunday, and make sure your car is out of the driveway by 10. Sandra comments on cars. I poured my coffee. No. Sheila stopped. Not dramatically. Completely. Her hand remained near the cabinet as she turned toward me. What? Tyler stays on Saturday. My car stays in the driveway. And you can call Sandra about the dairy issue. You're better with that stuff anyway. Then I picked up my mug. The kitchen went silent. Sheila stared at me, and for the first time since I'd entered that house, I watched 30 years of certainty fail her. Her expression searched for the response that normally brought Dean back into line, but nothing seemed to fit. Dean. My brother's name came out slow and measured. I'm just asking you to. I know what you're asking. I kept my voice warm. That mattered. I wasn't trying to intimidate her or start a fight. Anger would have given her something familiar to push against. Instead, there was simply a man standing in her kitchen who had heard her instructions and decided 3 of them didn't work for him. I'm good with everything else, I said. Those 3 things? I'm passing them back. Sheila stared at me another second, then walked out of the kitchen without finishing her coffee. I thought I had simply disrupted her morning routine. What I didn't know was that she went straight to her phone. And the person she called would matter a lot before the week was over. By dinner, the first no had already changed the temperature of the house. Sheila was pleasant, not naturally pleasant, precisely pleasant. Every smile landed exactly where she wanted it. Every sentence was softer than necessary. Dean had warned me about this version of her. He called it the good weather warning. Sunshine right before Sheila needed something. And that night, the forecast was almost perfect. At dinner, Sheila passed me the salad with the same carefully pleasant smile she'd been wearing all evening. I was thinking we could repaint the den before the Pattersons come. The den looks fine. It looked fine 3 years ago. Now it looks dated. I like it. Her smile stayed in place. I just think it would be nice. I took the salad from her. Then let's talk about it after the Pattersons visit. If they don't notice the den, there's no reason to repaint it for them. Sheila set the bowl down a little harder than necessary. Not enough to call it anger. Just enough for me to notice. Another decision she hadn't made for Dean. Another small crack in a system that had worked exactly the same way for 30 years. By Wednesday afternoon, those cracks had traveled all the way to Columbus. The house phone rang, and Mara's name appeared on the caller ID. Dean's 23-year-old daughter rarely called Sheila's cell if she could avoid it. Hey, Dad. Her voice was cheerful, but underneath it she was listening carefully. Hey, sweetheart. How's Columbus? Good. Really good. A pause. Hey, are you okay? Why? You sound different. Sharp kid. Different how? I don't know. More. She searched for the word, then abandoned it. Dad, did you actually tell Mom no about something? I smiled at the kitchen wall. Why do you ask? Because she called me Monday and said you were being difficult. Mara paused. Dad, I've never heard her call you difficult. She says that about Tyler when he pushes back. Never you. So Sheila wasn't just reacting to me. She was already calling family members, trying to understand why the man she'd managed for 30 years had suddenly stopped behaving predictably. Things change, I said. Mara's voice softened immediately. Dad, is everything okay? I mean, are you okay? She deserved the truth, but it wasn't mine to give her yet. I'm the best I've been in a while, Mara. I promise. You don't need to worry about me right now. Silence. I could almost hear her putting pieces together. Okay, she finally said. I believe you. Good. Come visit Saturday. Bring your appetite. I'm cooking. You're cooking? You never... She stopped herself. Another clue. Okay, yeah. I'll come Saturday. After we hung up, I stood alone in Dean's kitchen. Mara knew something had changed, but her first reaction hadn't been annoyance or suspicion. She was worried about her father. Whatever Sheila had normalized inside that house, Mara had never completely accepted it. I pulled out my phone and texted Butch Keller back in Louisville. "How do you feel about driving to Cincinnati Saturday?" His reply came 4 seconds later. "Do I get to watch you do the thing?" I smiled. "Yeah, leaving Friday night." "What time?" By Thursday, Sheila had moved higher up the family chain. She called Roberta our mother. I didn't learn about it from Sheila, Tyler told me. He'd started dropping by more often Monday than Wednesday and again Thursday evening. Each time, he watched me with that same careful expression I'd noticed over Sunday dinner. Thursday, he stayed. We took drinks onto the back porch and sat while the September evening settled over Hyde Park. After a while, Tyler peeled at the label on his bottle. "She called Grandma Roberta." "Did she?" "Told her you were going through something. Said Grandma should probably check on you." I kept my face neutral. Tyler continued. "Grandma called me afterward. Asked if Dad seemed okay." "What did you tell her?" Tyler looked sideways at me. There it was again, that careful expression. Except now I understood it wasn't suspicion. He had been testing a theory. "I told her Dad seemed great," he said. "Best I've seen him in years, honestly." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Tyler looked straight at me. "Uncle Cole." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Tyler leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet breath. "I figured it out Monday night." This time, I turned toward him. "How?" Tyler gave me the smallest smile. "Because my father has never told my mother no like that in his entire life." Tyler said it without drama. "You hold your coffee mug differently." I glanced down at my hand. "What?" "Dad holds his with both hands." "You always use the handle." He leaned back. "I've been watching you for 3 days." The coffee mug. Of all the details Dean and I had spent 2 days memorizing, I'd missed something that simple. Patrice would have caught it in 5 minutes. I looked at my nephew, 26 years old, carrying his father's face and steadiness. But there was something in Tyler's eyes that Dean had slowly lost over 30 years, the instinct to trust his own judgment. "How long have you known your dad needed something to change?" I asked. Tyler looked toward the yard. "A long time." Then his expression shifted. "Probably since I was 12. He told me Dean had volunteered to coach his Little League team that year. Sheila made him quit because the games conflicted with her book club schedule. He coached one game," Tyler said. "I still remember it. Dad was good. He was laughing the whole time." Tyler went quiet before adding, "I don't remember the last time I saw him laugh without looking at Mom first." That one stayed with me. I set my mug down using both hands. "Tyler, I need you to keep this from your mother. Just a few more days. Can you do that?" He looked straight at me. "Uncle Cole, I've been not saying things to my mother since I was 12. I think I can handle a few more days." By Friday, Sheila changed tactics. She stopped asking, stopped suggesting, stopped performing pleasant. Instead, she brought out the silence Dean had warned me about. Not ordinary quiet. This silence was deliberate. It followed you from room to room and made the entire house feel as though someone had started an argument but refused to tell you what you'd done wrong. Dean had spent years filling that silence himself, apologizing, asking what was wrong, offering to fix problems nobody had actually named. I didn't. I'd spent 25 years in corrections around people who knew exactly how to use silence as leverage. I had seen inmates refuse to speak for days because they knew everyone around them would eventually become uncomfortable enough to react. So, I made coffee, cooked breakfast, left Sheila's portion covered on the counter. Then I went into Dean's home office, opened the crossword I'd brought from Louisville, and enjoyed my morning. At 11, Sheila appeared in the doorway. "I don't understand what's happening with you." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "You've been different since Sunday. You're not." She stopped, searching. "You're not talking to me. You're not." The sentence died again. Sheila wasn't accustomed to explaining the rules, because Dean had spent 30 years learning them without being told. Finally, she said, "I feel like you don't care about what I need right now." "I hear you." I put the crossword aside. "What do you need?" She had walked into the room prepared for resistance. The direct question caught her off guard. "I need you to..." She paused. "I need things to feel normal." They feel pretty normal to me. I made breakfast. I checked the garage shelving. Fixed the left side, by the way. 2 loose screws. I've been here all morning. Her jaw tightened. That's not what I mean. Then help me understand. I kept my voice calm. What exactly do you need from me, Sheila? She stared at me. Specifically. That word changed something. For the first time, I wasn't accepting a vague accusation and scrambling to solve it. I was asking her to say plainly what she expected. Sheila stood in the doorway for several seconds, and for the first time since I'd entered that house, the management posture slipped. What appeared underneath wasn't softness, it was uncertainty. She had spent decades operating a system that worked because Dean automatically filled every silence, anticipated every demand, and corrected himself before she ever had to explain what he'd done wrong. Now she was facing the same man's face, but the system wasn't responding. And Sheila was running out of buttons to push. Sheila left the doorway without answering me. I thought the conversation was over. It wasn't. She called our mother, Roberta, again, and this time, Roberta gave her an answer that would change the entire weekend. Saturday morning, Butch Keller pulled into the driveway at 9 sharp in his pickup, carrying a cooler of drinks, a bag of chips, and the unmistakable excitement of a man who had been waiting years to see Sheila lose control of her room. She answered the door. Butch. Somehow, she managed to make his name sound like a complaint. Sheila. Butch smiled as if they were old friends. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Brought some drinks. Dean around? Sheila glanced past him at the truck, the cooler, then back at Butch. He's in the kitchen. Butch walked past her without waiting for an invitation. In the kitchen, he set down the cooler and looked at me. For one dangerous second, I thought he was going to laugh. Instead, the man delivered the best performance of his life. Morning. Morning, Butch. I handed him coffee. Glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it. There was enough meaning buried in those 3 words to make me look away before Sheila noticed. Mara arrived around 11. The moment she saw me, she wrapped her arms around me. I hugged her back carefully. She was Dean's daughter, and pretending to be her father suddenly felt different from pretending to be Sheila's husband. Mara stepped away but kept her hands on my arms. You look good, Dad. Then she studied my face a second longer than she should have. Something shifted behind her eyes. Maybe she knew. Maybe she was only close. Either way, she decided not to ask. She released me and headed for the coffee. At noon, the person I had been waiting for finally arrived. Marcus Ford. I had called him Wednesday using Dean's phone. Marcus. It's Dean. Silence. I know it's been too long. More silence. Then Marcus finally answered. Way too long. I'm having some people over Saturday. I'd really like you to come. For several seconds, I thought the call had disconnected. Then his voice came back quieter. Dean? Yeah. Another pause. I'll be there. Marcus was 59 now, heavier than the old photographs Dean had shown me, with gray spreading through his temples. But he still had the same broad, steady face of the man who had once stood beside my brother at his wedding. When I opened the door Saturday, Marcus stared at me without speaking. Then he stepped forward and wrapped both arms around me. I let him. Whatever man Marcus believed he was hugging, that embrace belonged to Dean. 30 years of friendship, 7 years of silence, and somehow the first thing Marcus gave him back was a hug. Man, he whispered against my shoulder. I missed you. For a second, I couldn't answer. I know. Then I added the only words that felt right. Me too. By 12:15, Dean's house sounded completely different. Butch was talking too loudly in the kitchen. Mara was laughing. Marcus was helping with food. People were opening the refrigerator without asking permission and moving through rooms like they belonged there. It wasn't chaos. It was warmth. The kind of ordinary warmth Dean's house had apparently been missing for years. Then Sheila came downstairs. She reached the bottom step and stopped. Her eyes moved from Butch to Mara, then to Marcus, then across the food covering the kitchen counters. 4 different reactions crossed her face before she managed to erase all of them. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked into the room. Marcus. His name came out flat. Marcus turned toward her. Sheila. I didn't know you were coming. Before Marcus could answer, I stepped in. I invited him. Sheila slowly turned toward me. You invited Marcus? Yeah, I held her gaze. He's my oldest friend. Why wouldn't I? For a moment, nobody in the kitchen said anything. Sheila looked around the room again, and I finally understood what bothered her most. It wasn't Butch. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't even that I had invited people into her house without permission. It was that everyone seemed comfortable. For years, Sheila had controlled Dean by deciding who belonged in his life and who didn't. Now, in a single afternoon, the people she had pushed to the edges were walking back through the front door, and the house was starting to feel like Dean's again. Dean invited me, Marcus said with the relaxed politeness of a man who owed Sheila no explanation. Great to see you, Sheila. Her eyes moved straight to me. I met them without flinching. No apology. No nervous explanation. I simply stood in Dean's kitchen as if having his oldest friend there was the most natural thing in the world. And I could see what that did to her. Nothing about me was obviously wrong, but nothing was behaving the way she expected. For the first time all week, Sheila looked less like the owner of the room and more like someone wondering whether she had walked into the wrong house. I'm glad you're here, I told her. Eat something. At 1 o'clock, Roberta arrived. I hadn't invited her. Sheila had. That told me plenty. She had called her mother for reinforcement, which meant my little experiment had pushed her further off balance than I realized. Roberta Vance was 79, small and upright, with the sharp eyes of a woman who had spent decades noticing more than she said. She kissed Sheila on the cheek, surveyed the crowded room, and then saw me. Her eyes stopped. Dean. She held out both hands. I took them. Roberta studied my face, and I recognized the calculation immediately. Tyler had done the same thing earlier in the week. The difference was that Roberta seemed much closer to the answer. Roberta, glad you could make it. I smiled. Been a good week. She held my gaze a second too long, then released my hands and walked into the kitchen. What I didn't know was that Roberta had already made another phone call that morning, one Sheila knew nothing about. The afternoon rolled on with food, noise, and conversations stepping over one another. Butch and Marcus immediately fell into the easy rhythm of two men who had both spent years around Dean but had somehow never been allowed to become friends. Tyler arrived around 2, walked into the kitchen, spotted Marcus, and nearly stopped in his tracks. Did someone actually invite? He caught himself. His eyes found mine for half a second, then he sat down without finishing the sentence. He knew exactly what I was doing now, and judging from the tiny smile he tried to hide, he approved. Mara sat beside Roberta at the kitchen table. I caught them speaking quietly beneath the noise of the room. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the exchange. Mara said something, Roberta listened, then asked a question that made Mara glance toward me. Something was moving between them. Sheila, meanwhile, did what Sheila always did. She managed. She moved through the kitchen repositioning plates, offering drinks nobody had requested, redirecting conversations, correcting small details, keeping herself at the center of every moving part. The performance was polished. The problem was that nobody was following the choreography. Butch kept talking, Marcus kept laughing, Mara stayed beside her grandmother, Tyler moved wherever he wanted, and I didn't step in to restore Sheila's preferred order. The house kept functioning anyway. Better, actually. That was what seemed to bother her most. Around 3:15, I picked up my glass. Everybody. Conversations faded. Butch turned. Marcus looked over. Tyler and Mara went quiet. Even Sheila stopped moving. I raised the glass. To Dean. A few faces changed immediately. Wherever he is right now, and I know exactly where that is, this one's for him. Tyler lowered his eyes to hide a smile. Mara stared at me. Marcus slowly lifted his glass. Then everyone joined him. Even Sheila raised hers, though the expression on her face told me she had no idea what game she was standing inside. My phone buzzed. A message from Dean in Louisville. Patrice had been making sure he ate 3 real meals a day, slept 8 hours, and apparently spent part of the week watching old baseball games and finally grieving the Portland promotion he'd been forced to surrender 12 years earlier. His text was short. I can hear them from here. Go get them, brother. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked across the room. Roberta was staring directly at me. This time, there was no calculation left in her eyes. She knew. She just hadn't decided whether to expose me. Then her phone buzzed. Roberta glanced at the screen, looked back at me, and quietly stood up from the table. Cole, she said. The entire room went still. Roberta set down her glass and crossed the room toward me with the steady purpose of a 79-year-old woman who had finished waiting. Walk with me. We stepped onto Dean's back porch. The September afternoon had begun to cool, and Hyde Park had settled into that quiet Saturday rhythm where distant traffic and lawnmowers were just loud enough to remind you other people were nearby. Roberta looked across the yard. "You're not Dean." I said nothing. "You're Cole. I knew the moment you took my hands at the door. That got my attention. Dean always hugs me," she continued. "He doesn't take my hands. You did because you didn't know." Another detail I'd missed. First the coffee mug, now the greeting. Apparently 30 years of habits were harder to imitate than a face. I leaned against the railing. "Are you going to tell Sheila?" Roberta didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "My husband ran our house the same way for 41 years. Same methods, different name." Something changed in her voice. The carefulness disappeared, leaving behind something older and much heavier. I watched Sheila learn from it. At first, I thought she was learning to protect herself. I thought I was teaching my daughter to be strong. She looked down at her hands. I didn't understand what she was actually learning until it was too late. Roberta. She learned it from me, Cole. No excuse. No drama. Just a fact she had apparently spent years avoiding. I showed her that this was how you kept someone. You made yourself necessary. You controlled enough of their life that leaving became harder than staying. She looked back across the yard. My husband died 12 years ago. We were together 41 years, and standing here today, I realized something I've never allowed myself to ask. Her voice tightened. I don't know if he was happy. Neither of us spoke. And now I'm watching my daughter build the same house around your brother. She loves him, I said. I believe that much. Whatever else Sheila had become, I didn't think 30 years with Dean had been empty. Roberta nodded. I know she does. Then she looked at me, and for the first time that afternoon, her eyes looked tired. That's the worst part. So did I. That ended whatever satisfaction I might have felt about outmaneuvering Sheila. This wasn't simply one controlling woman finally losing control. It was a pattern that had crossed generations until nobody remembered where it started. Will you talk to her? I asked. Roberta turned toward me. That's why I came. At 4:30, Dean's gray sedan pulled into the driveway. Patrice was driving. She came through the door first, gave me one look that promised a very detailed conversation later, then headed toward Marcus and introduced herself. Dean entered behind her. The room changed instantly. For 10 days I had been wearing his routines, his clothes, his house, his place at the table. Now the real man stepped back into his own life. Dean stopped inside the kitchen and looked around. Butch was there. Marcus was standing near the counter. Tyler rose immediately from his chair. Mara covered her mouth when she saw her father. Dean's eyes moved slowly across the room as if he were trying to understand how all these pieces of his old life had somehow returned to the same place. Then he saw me. 2 brothers. Same face. Same height. 58 years of shared genetics standing only a few feet apart. I stepped aside. That was the entire point. Every no. Every uncomfortable breakfast. Every conversation Sheila couldn't control. Every friend brought back through the door. None of it had been about taking Dean's place. It was about holding that place open until he was ready to stand in it himself. Dean walked to the kitchen table and sat down. Tyler immediately took the chair across from him. Mara moved beside her father and placed her hand over his. Dean looked down at her hand, then at his children, and something in his face softened. Sheila hadn't moved. She stood at the edge of the kitchen, staring at the 2 identical men now standing inside the same house. For the first time all week, there was nothing left for her to misunderstand. Her eyes went from me to Dean, then back to me. Cole? She whispered. Yeah. Her face drained. How long? Before I could answer, Dean did. Long enough. Sheila turned toward her husband. The management posture I'd watched all week was gone. No instructions. No carefully measured disappointment. No silence designed to make someone else surrender first. Just Sheila and Dean looking at each other across a kitchen that suddenly belonged to neither person more than the other. Whatever passed between them in that moment was theirs. I had spent 10 days giving my brother his place back. What he did with it now had to be his choice. I walked past Sheila and stepped onto the back porch. Roberta was already there, looking out over the yard. "She'll talk to me," she said. "Tonight, after everyone leaves." I stood beside her. "How do you know?" "Because she called me Thursday crying. She said Dean was different, and she didn't know how to reach him." Roberta paused. "I told her that if the only way you know how to keep someone close is to put them in a box, then one day the box stops working. And when that happens, you have to learn how to hold them without closing the lid." I looked at her. "What did she say?" She asked me how. Roberta's voice softened. "I told her I'd show her tonight." We stood there for another moment without speaking. There was nothing left for me to fix that afternoon. The next part belonged to Dean, Sheila, and the people who had to decide whether 30 years of damage could become something different. I left Cincinnati Sunday and drove south through Kentucky toward Louisville, back to Patrice, back to my own house, and back to the coffee mug I had always held by the handle. Monday night, Dean called. This time, he wasn't sitting alone in a parking lot at 2 in the morning. He was standing in his own kitchen. "She agreed to counseling," he said. "First session is Wednesday." "That's good." Dean hesitated. "Roberta talked to her Saturday night." "How'd that go?" "Cole, did you know about Roberta's husband?" She told me. Sheila cried. He went quiet. I didn't know what to do with that. I've seen her cry before, but this was different. She wasn't trying to get anything from me. How did that feel? Silence stretched across the line. "Like maybe there's still something underneath all of this," Dean finally said. "Something I stopped looking for a long time ago. Maybe there is." I wasn't going to tell him what his marriage meant or what he should do with it. I'd spent 10 days making sure he could finally make those decisions himself. Then Dean's voice changed. "She asked me something this morning." "What?" She looked straight at me and said, "Was that Cole the whole time?" I smiled despite myself. "What did you tell her?" "The truth." I said yes. "And?" She didn't say anything for a while. Dean paused. Then she said something I want to get exactly right, because after 30 years, it might be the first thing she's ever said about all this that felt completely real. I waited. She said, "He's the only person who ever looked me in the eye and waited for an actual answer." That stopped me. For 10 days, I thought I had been showing Sheila what Dean sounded like when he stopped surrendering. Maybe I had also shown her something she had forgotten: a conversation wasn't supposed to end when one person gave an instruction. "That's something," I said. "Yeah," Dean answered quietly. "I thought so too. Counseling didn't erase 30 years. One strange week didn't magically repair a marriage, and Sheila didn't wake up Sunday morning as a different person. But things began moving. Marcus called Dean later that week. They talked for 2 hours. 7 years of silence didn't disappear in one conversation, but it was a start. Eventually, that phone call became a standing dinner on the first Saturday of every month in Hyde Park. I've been to a couple myself. Butch comes when he can. Mara drives down from Columbus. Tyler usually arrives early. And Marcus? Marcus talks enough to make up for 7 lost years. Last month, Tyler called me after one of those dinners. He told me Marcus had said something stupid at the table, and Dean burst out laughing. Not the careful little laugh Tyler remembered from childhood. Not the kind where Dean checked Sheila's face before deciding whether it was safe to keep going. A real laugh. Loud. Unplanned. His own. Tyler told me he had to look away for a second because he wasn't ready for what hearing it would do to him. Then he said, "That's the one I'm going to remember, Uncle Cole." I knew exactly what he meant. 30 years can teach a man to make himself smaller, but sometimes getting his life back doesn't begin with leaving the house, winning an argument, or blowing everything apart. Sometimes it begins much smaller. One phone call from a parking lot, one person willing to listen, and one word a man should never have needed permission to say in the first place.